Hello, philosophy fans. My name's Justin Home, and this is another edition of the Philosophy Podcast. And today I'd like to talk about death. Now, some of you probably would have felt a certain amount of fear rise up in you at the sound of that word. And I hope you will have the courage to stay tuned, because I don't think there's really anything to fear, and I'm going to explain why. For me, it was one of the biggest fears. I thought it was at one time. I suffered an awful lot from fear of what I thought was fear of death. And I think our culture pretty much programs people to be terrified of death. And I don't think there's really any good reason for it. I'm not sure why it happens exactly, but I know it does. And I know the effect it had on me. And of course, you can even become afraid of the fear of death, because in its own right, fear is quite a threatening thing, quite a fearful thing. It can actually feel like your sanity, your very soul, is being threatened by fear itself. And so I think there's a whole complex of issues that people have around death. And I would recommend to anyone who has extreme fear of death and thinks they may have fear of fear itself, that you need to try and get out of that vicious circle of fearing fear. You need to find a way to allow fear and not resist it, and to be with it. And in that moment, you will no longer be fearing fear. You will be experiencing fear. Now then the question becomes, well, is it a legitimate fear? Oh, and I just want to mention one way you can do that. How to allow fear, and how to be with it, and how to deal with it when it's there. And that was a breathing exercise I learned, which, very simple. It's just a matter of calming the body down, because what can happen is, when you're feeling fearful, the body can react in what's called a fight or flight response. So the fear comes up in the mind, the body reacts as though the fear is in the world. For instance, that there's some kind of physical threat, like an animal or an accident, or something going to happen, and it pumps adrenaline into the bloodstream, which is a stimulant, and it also increases heart rate, increases metabolism, and increases breathing, and so that's pumping oxygen and stimulant into the body, and also into the brain, because part of the body's response is to up the speed of the brain as well, the metabolism of the brain, so that we can process information quicker, we can react quicker to a physical threat. Unfortunately, this has the side effect of sometimes increasing the fear in the brain, and so then you get a feedback, a very vicious negative feedback effect, where the body's reaction is increasing the stimulation of the brain, which is itself becoming more fearful. And so that is again triggering the body even more, getting this feedback loop. So the way out of that, which is really a physical feedback loop, is a breathing exercise where you breathe in slowly and deeply through the nose and hold it for a second, and then breathe out through the mouth. And you could also add a little visualization to that of imagining breathing out the fear, however you want to visualize that. I used to visualize that as a kind of fire or heat going out with my breath. And this will actually calm the body down, which will in turn stop triggering the brain to get even more excited. And you'll actually break that feedback loop. Obviously, don't breathe too quickly, otherwise you're just adding literally fuel to the fire with oxygen. So yeah, just quickly mention that. So you want to get out of that kind of fear, that kind of panic situation, which is kind of like a feedback effect. So then you should be left with just a fear. And it's probably going to be of death. A lot of people have this, might not be, could be something else. And what I finally realised was I couldn't live with that fear anymore. So I was so desperate that I actually turned towards it. Turned towards the fear. I went in and started exploring it. And this is just that feels so wrong. I mean, it's like we're kind of trained and we instinctively know to retreat from what makes us fearful. And, in general, that's a good idea. If you're standing at the edge of a cliff, feeling afraid you might fall, step back away from it. If there's a big angry dog barking at you and looks like it might jump over a small fence, back away. If you're driving too fast and you suddenly think, oh my gosh, this is a bit too fast, or maybe you should slow down a bit. All good responses. But in this case, that's all wrong. And what you need to do is go into the fear, because it's a kind of illusion. Someone once said, I think Brian Tracy told me this one, on one of his audio tapes. Fear is FEAR, and it stands for Fantasised Experiences Appearing Real. FEAR. I thought, well, that sounds like an overgeneralization. And of course, there are often appropriate, situations to feel fearful in, as I've mentioned a few. But just to have this general existential fear in your life is not like that. There's no need for that fear. It's not protecting you from anything, any more than fear of fear protects you from anything. It's a danger to your life. And so is this kind of just having this fear of something that is probably illusory. And in my experience, the fear of death is a fear of something illusory. And I went into it, and what happens when you go into a fear like this is it gets more and more intense. But if you've learned this breathing exercise, you can deal with that. You can go into it, it starts to get stronger and stronger. Okay, calms down. Then you can go back into it again. So you can gradually explore it. When it feels too uncomfortable, just breathe and relax and then go back in again. And I did that for weeks. And becoming more and more comfortable with higher and higher levels of fear. And I was honestly at the point where I thought, well, I'm not sure how much deeper I can go into this and really expect to be able to cope with it. And it was around that time that I got close enough to actually see what the real fear was. And it's great in a way, fear, because it leads you to its core. If you just follow that fear and you feel it getting stronger, you know you're getting closer to it. You know that you're getting closer and closer to the source, the core. And so in a way it acts as a beacon for you to zero in on the central issue. And if you just have the confidence to do that and to gradually keep plodding away and scratching away and pushing away until you get to it. And I was just so surprised when I got to it. It just suddenly evaporated. Bang. Because it was so obviously illusory. And basically what had happened was, somewhere along the line I'd got the idea that I could both die and continue existing at the same time. And this was what really terrified me. And you say, well, how can that idea possibly exist in your mind? These kind of ideas do exist in our minds, and they're completely silly. You know, they're that silly. They're that silly. And the way it was is this nightmare that was causing me so much terror was being dead and looking back at my life and thinking, oh my God, I'm dead, I've gone and died, I'm dead now forever. And when you think about it, if you were really in that situation, say if you were lying in a bed, this is how I got close to this, how I finally got to the core of it. I really went into trying to feel what it would be like to really die. So you imagine you're lying in the bed and you know your vision starts to go darker and darker at the edges, and gradually, you know, you get tunnel vision, your hearing's starting to go, you feel your heart jumping in your chest. I mean, you must be feeling a little bit of I can feel it now. I mean, this is still frightening. To die itself is frightening, and of course there's an element of fear always in death. I'm not saying I'm completely free of some fear of death or dying, because there's an unknown element. Who knows? Who really knows? But anyway, we know probably what happens as you are dying in this world, as your body is dying. So we can imagine what's going on. You know, everything's just closing down. All the systems of the body are closing down, and your senses are closing down, presumably. And at that point, you know You're leaving this world. Whatever else you do, know that. And then what? Well, let's say there's nothing else to your life, to your existence. You would never know. You could never know that. You would be lying there on the bed, the system's closing down, vision going black, and you'd be thinking, oh my God, this is it. This is the last few moments of my life. Perhaps. Certainly of this life. And maybe of all life. All my life, all my consciousness. Maybe you have the presence of mind to say a last prayer. Yeah? God, I hope you're there to catch me. Or something. And then there's nothing. Yeah, let's assume that there's nothing. You're gone. There's nothing. You know, the body systems have shut down. You were the body. Yeah, basically. There was no soul. There was no God. Or at least, not for you, perhaps. Maybe for others. But let's just say it's true for you. Nothing. You're never going to know. You're going to be there lying on the bed with that last prayer, with that last few flickers of light, last few flickers of consciousness. That's it. You're not going to be able to know what's happened. It's not going to be an experience like all the other experiences of your life, because you won't be able to experience it. It's an end of experience. That is it. That is what a real death is, by definition. If you continue to have experiences after your body dies, then you haven't died. Just a part of you have died. Just like part of you dies every day. Your skin cells fall off, they die. Your hair falls off, it dies, it's dead. Essentially, it's not alive anymore. Your whole body's being replaced every 7 years. So, if you carry on, that's not death. That's transition, or perhaps return to a previous state. But if it really is death, it's literally nothing. It literally cannot happen. And I would recommend you really go into it and really explore it if you really are afraid of it. And you will see this truth for yourself. Maybe you can even see it already from what I've said. And I'm not the first to work this out. I found out later that one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Socrates, the father of philosophy indeed, some would say, in ancient Greece 3,000 years ago or so, formulated a very similar thought, that if death really is nothingness, then it would just be similar to like the deepest sleep you can imagine that you've ever had in your life. That sleep you had after you were partying for 3 days and you were knocked out for like 15 hours and it seemed like 5 minutes. That sleep. Imagine that sleep times 1,000. This wasn't his words. Paraphrasing. That's what it would be like. So eternity, he says, eternity would be one night. So there you go. That's my thoughts and advice for those who feel that fear, and especially those who feel a fear of fear. So thank you for watching. Bye for now.